You're listening to the Divorce and Your Money Show, the #1 podcast that discusses the complex business of divorce. I'm your host, Sean Lehman, MBA and certified divorce financial analyst. You can visit us at divorceandyourmoney.com. And at this episode, we're discussing disabilities and how it might affect your divorce process. Now, disabilities are near and dear to my heart. I grew up in a house where my own mother was disabled and thankfully not divorced, but I have an unusual understanding of some of the ways that chronic illnesses can have an impact in the support that's required. And in a divorce context, on top of just everything else that's going on, the disability can't be ignored. If one spouse is disabled, and it can have a big effect on the divorce process in terms of what you should expect. And I'm going to discuss what you should do. Now, if you're the disabled spouse, this is an excellent episode to listen to. And if your spouse is the one who is disabled, you will also learn a lot of considerations in this particular episode. And I'm going to give you an anecdote about how important this topic is anytime someone has a coaching call with me, I have some general questions I ask to get a feel for what's going on in the financial picture, but I have some specific questions that I ask absolutely everyone on a coaching call. And that is, in the introductory call, is one spouse disabled? Do they have any sort of physical or mental illnesses that we need to discuss? The reason I ask this question every time in every call is because if there is a disability, it can completely change the divorce process from a financial perspective and what each party should expect going forward. And this whole process centers around one issue, or this whole episode, I should say. And the question is this, is what support is required for the spouse with a disability after the divorce? And to answer this question, we're going to go through 3 key topics. And the 3 key topics are: what level of service is currently provided to the disabled spouse? Will the spouse with a disability require additional services going forward? And the third thing is, can you afford spousal support and how much? Because we're trying to get a sense is, when you're married, you might have been the caretaker, or the other partner without a disability may have been the caretaker for a long time. But if you're getting divorced, there's a whole new range of considerations that you have to think about. And when it comes to disabilities are not necessarily static. They can evolve, they can worsen, they can get better over time. But in many cases, as you age, disabilities amplify, and you need even more support going forward than you did in the past. And without that spouse who was there helping you, well, you're going to have an alternative. And so let's jump into some of these questions and some of the things that you're going to have to think about as a spouse with a disability, or the spouse who is divorcing someone with a disability. The first one is, what level of service do you currently provide for the disabled spouse? And what I'm getting at is, if you are the spouse who doesn't have a disability, what do you do for the spouse that's disabled? Are you the primary caretaker on a daily basis? For instance, do you drive them to doctor's appointments? Do you help them in and out of the shower or something like that? Do you run errands or pick up a prescription? And conversely, if you're the one with a disability, you should have a clear list of all the tasks that your soon-to-be ex-spouse provides and helps with, because that is a very strong element to your case. Because after the divorce is over, all of these tasks are going to still need completing when you're living on your own. And so you need to make a list of activities that your spouse helps with, or if you're the one providing support, that you provide today. And you're also going to need to know is what activities could the person with a disability do on their own? There's so many varying degrees of disability. I hate to lump them into one. It's very frustrating because I see an extraordinary range of disabilities that I work with, actually quite a few, as I record this episode. And so there's a lot of different things that you should be thinking about, but you need to do an honest evaluation of what support is currently provided by the non-disabled spouse. Issue number 2 is, will your spouse need additional services? If one spouse is the caregiver, does the spouse who's disabled have other family support? Or is there live-in help, or like a part-time assistant of some kind, or someone who comes a few days a week? And if there isn't, will there maybe be someone who needs to come in the future because the spouse is gone? Also, how is that support being provided? Is it being covered by insurance or Social Security, because Social Security covers disabilities? And one of the big questions is, what financial programs, be it insurance or disability or long-term care or other options, does the disabled spouse qualify for? And that's a question that requires a lot of research, because you have to figure out how much can be provided at a reduced cost and how much you're going to be paying out of pocket. That's a very big financial question that needs to be resolved. That's a huge financial question. Issue number 3 is that, can you afford spousal support, and how much? I'm going to look at this from the perspective of the spouse who will be providing, or I should say paying, spousal support. If you're the earner in the family because you're paying spousal support and your spouse is disabled, well, can your spouse work? As I said, disabilities come in an enormous range, and so there might be an opportunity for your spouse to work, but realistically, how much income will that provide if they can work at all? And the thing you got to understand about spousal support in a disability context is almost every state requires a substantially higher spousal support payment when your spouse is disabled. Spousal support exists so that one spouse doesn't end up just destitute after the divorce process, right? Because, if one spouse maybe raised the kids for 20 or 30 years and doesn't necessarily have great job prospects, they may as well be a 55-year-old entry-level employee, but you as a family made $200,000 a year or $500,000 a year, who knows? You can't expect that spouse to all of a sudden start making $10 an hour and trying to support themselves. The reason spousal support exists is so that spouse can still live a decent lifestyle after the divorce. And so when you think about a disability concept or context, well, spousal support has to continue so that spouse doesn't just end up in a facility somewhere where they're just left to rot. And so what the support requirements are usually much higher. And you're going to have to figure out what all of those out-of-pocket medical expenses are. And you may be required to pay a substantial portion of them. There might be a cap on it, but you might have a very, very high spousal support burden. And if your state says, well, normally spousal support will end after 7 years, given that you've been married for 20 years. Well, in a disability context, that spousal support may have no end date. So it is something for you to think about. And on top of that, you might have to pay for additional things. Like you might be the one who's required to pay for health insurance or add it to your existing plan or something like that. So knowing the future potential spousal support burden is a very critical financial issue that you need to know about. And states take disabilities. Most states take disabilities very, very seriously. And it's going to add a big layer, a big question mark to your divorce process. I have some clients where the only subject of discussion is how much future care is going to be required. That's it. They don't care. They know who's going to get what assets. They know everything else except they are spending tens of thousands of dollars trying to figure out who is going to be paying how much additional spousal support. But the issue is is if you think about support in a 20 or 30-year context times a much higher support amount than one might normally be entitled to, well, that support burden could be hundreds of thousands of dollars over 20 years, hundreds of thousands of additional dollars, or millions of dollars because of all of the additional support and medical expenses that are required. So when it comes to a disability, you need to really inform yourself and make sure that you're protected and you're doing everything you can to understand the financial picture and understand to the best of your ability what the additional burden is going to be required. Disabilities can be unpredictable in terms of how they evolve over time, but you need to start planning those scenarios and doing really detailed financial analyses to understand what that burden might be, because it's going to be much higher than it would be normally. So don't forget the 3 key questions. Is what level of service is currently provided for the disabled spouse? Will your spouse need additional services? And finally, is can you afford spousal support? And really, what is that additional spousal support requirement going to be? Now, before you go, I want to make sure you get some really important information. All you have to do is go to divorceandyourmoney.com. The first thing you do on the website is sign up for the email list. You'll see a little box that says get updates and tips, and I will send you exclusive articles and content that you won't find anywhere else. And it goes directly to you, and it's a great way to reach me and ask me your questions. Second, on the coaching page at divorceandyourmoney.com, you can learn about our personalized coaching services. And here's the reality. Many of you are making financial mistakes or not getting all that you deserve as part of the divorce process. Or maybe you're just having a hard time making sense of it all and making rational decisions during this emotional time. And look, your divorce attorney is good. It's great to have a divorce attorney, but divorce attorneys are not really financial experts. And so ask yourself a simple question. Did your attorney, if you have one, explain some of the details that we just talked about in this episode? The financial issues in divorce can be really complicated, and that's why there's over 100 episodes of information, hours and hours and hours of information just related to the complex financial things that you need to be thinking about as you get divorced. And one of the big questions you might have if you've been listening to the podcast or read the book, Divorce and Your Money, the No-Nonsense Guide, or have been reading the articles that I send just to the email listeners, you might be asking, well, how does this apply to me? How does this apply to my situation and my divorce and what's going on in my life? Well, the only way to really find out, and the only way I can help you in your specific situation, is through the personalized coaching sessions. And I get to work with you across the United States, from California to New York and everywhere in between, in person, by phone, and by email, depending upon what you need. And all you have to do to start getting help is go to divorceandyourmoney.com/coaching. You'll see some videos there, and you just fill out a short form, answer a few questions, and we will set up a complimentary introductory call. Here's the deal, is once you sign that divorce settlement, there's no going back. So the sooner you get help, the better. Finally, subscribe to the podcast and make sure you automatically get updates with all the new episodes that are coming out. And leave a review. A 5-star review on iTunes really helps other people discover this show. I'm your host, Sean Lehman, MBA and Certified Divorce Financial Analyst. Thank you for listening.